From Software has announced an upcoming expansion to Elden Ring's story, Shadow of the Erdtree. With this DLC, it is all but confirmed that our Tarnished will encounter the Demigods Godwyn the Golden and Miquella the Unalloyed. Miquella appears to be the main vessel through which we will experience the DLC, and Godwyn seems to be our main antagonist. In the promotional image, we see Miquella riding Torrent, watching as a large tree, which seems to be made of deathroot, coils around a young Erdtree, snapping it off at its base. It is highly likely that our Tarnished will face off against these demigods in a grand battle, whether that be in a dream, or a memory, or sometime in the past. Therefore, we would do well to review what we can learn about these two demigods in the lands between as they are now, before undertaking our new adventure. Miquella is the son of Queen Marika and King Consort Radagon. He is the twin sibling to Malenia, the undefeated swordswoman, and stepbrother to Godwyn the Golden. Both Miquella and Malenia were born as Empyreans, special demigod children, with the potential to become vessels for the greater will or other outer gods. As such, each one was born afflicted. Miquella was granted the power of an abundant and unyielding life, cursing him to live eternally in the body of a small child. And Malenia was cursed by the outer god of rot, causing her to suffer from a cursed form of leprosy. The scarlet rot would claim Malenia's eyes, her legs, and one of her arms. Seeing this, Miquella dove headfirst into the study of Golden Order fundamentalism in an attempt to heal her of her affliction. The Golden Order is the dominant religion of the Lands Between under Marika's rule. Miquella would study these clerical duties, which were performed in the service to the greater will, most likely led under the tutelage of his father Radagon. Radagon held that the Golden Order was perfect, and Miquella believed this for a short time. He would grow in faith and intellect, crafting spells as gifts for his father, such as Discus of Light and Triple Rings of Light. We come to learn, as Miquella had, that there is no cure within the Golden Order for the Scarlet Rot. No cleric of the Order, not his father Radagon nor his mother Marika, not even the power of the greater will itself, would cure his sister. And so, Miquella found a flaw within the Golden Order, but also within the outer gods themselves. This revelation would inspire Miquella to develop something which could cure his sister, and do away with the meddling of outer gods. Such was the inception of unalloyed gold. Godwyn the Golden is the son of Queen Marika the Eternal and Lord Godfrey, the acclaimed first Elden Lord. His father was the one who defeated the fire giants upon the snowy mountaintops, and it was his father who faced Dragon Lord Placidusax alone. Coming from such a stock of warrior, he would take naturally to commanding the defenses of Leyndell. His mettle would soon be tested, however, as after Lord Godfrey was exiled from the Lands Between, the hero Radagon would travel west to battle with the Carian royals over the Lake of Liurnia. It is most likely that in this time is when the ancient dragons once again attempted to lay siege to Leyndell. With Godfrey in exile, and Radagon preoccupied with Queen Rennala and her sorcerers, the city would have stood without a leading defender. But Godwyn, Marika's golden child, would stand against this powerful foe. After a long war, he would defeat the dread Fortisax in a fierce battle. Instead of slaying his foe, Godwyn would sheath his sword, choosing instead to befriend the leader of the ancient dragons. After brokering a truce, Godwyn would become one of the most adored figures in the history of the Lands Between. As an older brother to the Empyrean twins, Godwyn would become someone that they would come to for protection and comfort. Malenia may have been inspired by one of Godwyn's old war stories to pick up a blade herself and learn to fight. Miquella would have learned a very powerful lesson from Godwyn and his draconic friend, that anyone, even those who were once deemed an enemy, could become a great ally or a close friend. Malenia would soon desire to take up the study of warfare. With his newfound element, Miquella would craft prosthetics and swords for her which could withstand the scarlet rot within her. She would be tutored by a legendary blind swordsman who sealed away the god of rot long before Malenia was born. Under his tutelage, Malenia would grow to be the finest swordswoman in the lands between. Her teacher would explain to her how he defeated the god of rot. There is a legend saying that his blade was fashioned by a fairy after the manner of flowing water, because flowing water will wash away stagnant rot. He taught her to fight like a waterfowl dancing upon a flowing river, and through the ingenuity of her brother Miquella and the will of her own warrior spirit, the rot within Malenia would be abated. Through his study of unalloyed gold, Miquella would develop the power to remove the influence of outer gods. He would craft needles which, when embedded in a person's flesh, would remove the presence of an outer god. Miquella would eventually see that he could not only use these needles to remove malevolent gods like the outer god of rot, but all gods that bring suffering, namely the Blood Star, the fell god of the fire giants, the Estelles or whatever created them, and possibly even the greater will itself. While I don't think Miquella had any burning animosity against the greater will at the beginning, I do think he begins to believe that he could improve upon the greater will's mistakes. As an Empyrean, he has a chance to ascend to godhood as the vessel for an outer god's will, but I think Miquella planned to ascend beyond being a simple vessel to becoming a new outer god himself. At the start of the game, our Tarnished warrior wakes up in the Chapel of Anticipation. This building is abandoned, greatly damaged, but its purpose is hidden within the name. The Chapel of Anticipation was constructed by Queen Marika to gather in the Tarnished warriors that she had once exiled after they would die and find their way back to the lands between. As we explore this small, storm-ridden plateau, we will see that someone else has been awaiting our arrival. Fluttering just off the cliff are 3 nascent butterflies. These butterflies give the appearance of having just hatched from their cocoons for their entire life. They are a physical manifestation of Miquella's divine power in the world, a living symbol of his eternal abundance and childlike youth. Moving on from the chapel's cliffside, whether by falling to our deaths or dying to the grafted scion, we awake in the stranded graveyard. We catch a glimpse of Malenia riding Torrent, our soon-to-be faithful steed. After leaving the cave and coming to the first step, we will find a small church dedicated to the Saint Ella. Come nightfall, a strange, 4-armed, blue, doll girl named Renna will appear before us, and she will give us a gift, a spirit-calling bell, which has the ability to summon forth spirits that can aid us in battle. She tells us that this was a gift meant for us from Torrent's former master. We now know, from the Shadow of the Erdtree promotional image, that Miquella was Torrent's former master. From here, we begin to journey around Aigil Lake. We can stop and talk with a kind swordsman named Yura, who warns us to avoid the lake, as a dragon has laid claim to it. If one carefully explores the ruins, they will find a number of Trina's lilies, and possibly some of Miquella's lilies here as well. While there is more here to uncover, the risk is simply too great, but we will return here once we are a little bit stronger. Suffice to say, if one finds St. Trina's or Miquella's lilies anywhere on the map, one can be sure that Miquella has either visited the area or was at least venerated by people who once lived there. Continuing south into the Weeping Peninsula, we find the lonely Castle Morn. Inside the fort, we see a large number of chimeric misbegotten who have seemingly rebelled against their slave masters. If Miquella had ever visited Castle Morn before the Shattering while they were still enslaved, this would have stood as yet another reason for Miquella to denounce the so-called perfection of the Golden Order. As we move west along the peninsula, we come across the Church of Pilgrimage. Outside this church, we see a large number of spectral soldiers watching over a wandering mausoleum. Now, as we haven't seen these mausoleums before, they appear to resemble giant stone turtles, but we find out that they house within them the bodies of soulless demigods, the kin of Queen Marika, who were killed across the lands between during the Night of the Black Knives. The greatest among these was Godwyn the Golden. A spirit outside the church gives light to the scene before us. If we explore the cliff on which a minor Erdtree grows, to the west we will find a medium-sized heater shield painted with the symbol of the eclipse. This symbol is said to ward off destined death from those who live in death, spirits who continue to live on as skeletons or ghosts. To the east, we will find a lightning incantation, most likely used by Godwyn in battle after befriending the ancient dragon Dread Fortisax. This incantation appears in a more powerful form, even after Godwyn is cursed to live in death. If we move to the southernmost point of this peninsula, we will reach a large tower named the Tower of Return. This structure is most likely meant to serve as a lighthouse, guiding ships carrying Tarnished back to the lands between. The Tarnished on these ships would be coming back from exile, having died outside of the lands between. The soldiers garrisoned here are under orders from Godric, most likely to capture the unsuspecting Tarnished and bring them back to Castle Stormvale for his grafting experiments. After clearing the tower of Godric's men and saving our fellow Tarnished, we'll find a small chest on the roof near the ballista. It is in this chest that the Tower of Return has a double meaning. Upon opening the chest, we are encompassed in a purple mist and will be transported to a new location, Lanedell, the royal capital. The tower we stand on is connected via elevator to the Round Table Hold, the home of Queen Marika the Eternal, King Consort Radagon, and their demigod children. If we take the Sending Gate on the far end of the tower, we will teleport to the isolated Divine Tower. This is the tower where we can reignite the Great Rune of Malenia, and we will most likely do the same thing here with Miquella's Great Rune. After resting at a nearby site of grace, or just falling off the Divine Tower and dying, we will be able to fast travel back to Limgrave, since that is the most fitting area for our current level. After completing Castle Morn's little quest, we can return to Lake Agheel with the burnt ruins. Here, there are 2 chests that we can loot. In these ruin-type dungeons, there are usually a secluded set of stairs leading underground. The stairs may lead directly to a chest, or to a small combat encounter with a chest hidden behind a door. The first staircase is hidden behind a high wall that one can only jump over while on Torrent's back. That's not too important, but I did think it was a little noticeable as an Easter egg of sorts. At the base of the stairs is a chest, and upon opening it, we find the twin blade weapon. Its description reads, "A sword with blades on both sides of the hilt. This weapon is difficult to wield and demands high dexterity." This weapon would be the weapon of choice for Miquella, as he is cursed with an eternally childlike body. Strength would simply not be his forte. He would have to value speed and skill over sheer brutality. As we scramble around the ruins, we can find a second staircase. Downstairs are a number of rats, the perfect targets to test out our new weapon. After getting used to the twin blades attack style, we'll open up the chest at the back of the room. Only, we find ourselves once again caught in another transporter trap. Again, we should note the color of the mist, a soft blend of purple and white smoke. This time, we wake up in the Celia crystal tunnels. Looking around and taking note of the room we find ourselves, we find a small candle with a purple flame. This is an important detail. There's only one source of purple flame in the lands between, and that is the Torch of Saint Trina. We see a number of these candles around the mines being employed by miners who are digging up glintstone. This glintstone is likely meant for the sorcerers of the city of Celia, but Miquella seems to have employed a number of kindred rotpests, self-dedicated servants of Malenia, guard this mine. Why on earth would Miquella have a chest that would teleport him to Celia? And why to this mine specifically? And what's the deal with his security detail? The answer can be found a short distance northeast from Celia, in the tower named Lenny's Rise. The scholar who lives in this tower appears to have sealed himself inside. Of course, if you are as bad at parkour as I am, with Soren's help, you should manage to get into the building using a whirlwind nearby, riding through the balcony. And of course, it's always fun getting to show Torrent a few new books. However, our learning must come to an end, as we find we are not alone in this wizard tower. In the entryway of the rise, we find what is left of the sorcerer Lenny. A grotesque amalgamation of glintstone crowns have accumulated around them, turning them into a graven school mass. Littered around their halls are shards of dark glintstone veined with glowing gold ore. It may be that this darker glintstone has a sort of divine connotation, as we can see veins of gold running throughout it. The greater will does manifest itself in waves of golden light. We do know that in ancient times the greater will sent a golden star bearing a beast into the lands between. It may be that Miquella compelled Lenny to study this strange glintstone so much that they looked too far into the primeval current, possibly even past it, to glimpse a fraction of the greater well itself. This glintstone discovery was not the only thing that Miquella takes with him from Celia. Around the city we find another of beacons, which act as arcane batteries for magical seals, forming a sort of security ring around certain sectors of the city. If we head north, following the back streets of Celia, we will eventually reach the Church of Plague. Inside this church, we can begin Millicent's quest line, a faithful companion who herself is part of, or rather a daughter to, Malenia. If we assist her throughout her journey, we will receive Miquella's unalloyed gold needle, which can be used to dispel the influence of outer gods. We also find a number of sacramental buds growing here, saplings watered by Miquella's own abundant blood, in hopes that one would one day grow into a new Erdtree. There is something a little peculiar about this church, and I'm not talking about the pests guarding it outside the door. There's almost a ramp of boxes and other scrap materials leading outside of a church window. If we follow this, we land in a small cemetery behind the chapel. There's a single kindred of rot guarding this area. There is a small stone mausoleum, standing stone, which appears in the center frame as we drop down. This particular path seems unusual. This may become an important area when the DLC arrives. Moving on from Celia, we run for our lives out of Caelid back towards Limgrave. Along the way, we come across some Forsaken Ruins on the west side of Caelid, named, unironically, the Forsaken Ruins. Looking down over this place, we will see a number of St. Trina's lilies here, showing the theological convictions of St. Trina had also spread to Caelid, alongside Miquella himself. In a chest underneath the ruins, we can find the Sword of St. Trina. Its unique skill, Mist of Slumber, slashes out with a faint purple mist, which spreads sleep ailment to nearby foes. This is the same mist that we, and Miquella have been using to teleport via chest around the lands between. Moving back through Limgrave, we can trace Miquella's movements to Liurnia of the Lakes. Our first stop is the village of Albinaurics. Albinaurics are artificial life forms created by arcane and scientific study. Because of their artificial nature, they fall outside of the bounds of the Erdtree's cycle of rebirth, and are persecuted by the people of the lands between. It is in this village that we find the first half of the secret medallion for the Grand Lift of Rold. This medallion would take the Albinaurics to the land where Miquella's Erdtree was growing. This was their promised land, a gift from Miquella, as a place where they would never be persecuted ever again. We can continue north, taking quick note of the Trina and Miquella lilies sprouting around the grounds of the Academy Gate town. We can trace Miquella's movements past the 4 belfries, as we have already seen that he has made previous visits to the Chapel of Anticipation. We end our lakeside expedition at the Caria Manor. Here, Miquella would have visited his stepsister Ranni and spoken at length about their philosophies on faith, sorceries, and their both being born Empyreans. We know that Miquella trusted Ranni, or at least that's what Ranni makes us believe, since he left the spirit-calling bell with her as a gift meant for us in the future. If he ever visited Caria Manor, he may have also encountered the Knight Latenna, and perhaps spoken with her about guiding the Albinaurics to a safe haven he was building. It's rumored by some that Latenna is herself one of the towering Albinaurics, but we do not know this for certain. The descriptions on her armor, her shield, and her expertise in cavalry warfare does seem to point in that direction. This friendship between Miquella and Ranni seems rather odd, but it may be that he was unaware of Ranni's participation in the Night of the Black Knives. Godwyn the Golden currently lies in the deep-root depths, far below Leyndell. His body was laid to rest at the roots of the great tree, in hopes that the Erdtree would call to him and bring his body back through the cycle of rebirth. However, as the roots reached out for Godwyn, his form would absorb the primordial life energies within the Erdtree, transforming himself into a monstrous chimera of various sea monsters. The roots attached to his body would begin to spawn new shoots from the great tree's roots, spreading death root across the lands between, and with it, the curse of those who live in death. It is at this time that I believe we see the events of the DLC promotional image. A tree of death root with various pieces of Godwyn's face sprouts up from the roots connected to Godwyn's soulless body, and coils around the Erdtree, crushing it and snapping it at its base. During this time, a large number of those who live in death would begin to rise from the earth, beginning a sort of zombie apocalypse that would rattle the city of Leyndell. Miquella would return briefly to his fundamentalist roots and begin crafting weapons which would prove effective in slaying the undead. All of this death would catch the eye of the outer god of death, as it would send a death bird as its envoy to patrol the Outsus Plateau. In our current day, we see that Godwyn's tree no longer exists. However, we may actually see evidence of its destruction. Looking around the city of Leyndell, we see roofs are caved in. The streets are filled with ash, and a great portion of the city seems to have sunken underground and flooded with water. This may be the result of the Shattering War, but it is known that the city of Leyndell never actually fell to any usurper. What's more interesting is that this missing half of the city of Leyndell can be found in the deep-root depths. fallen and ruined, flooding with water and melted corpse wax from the guardian gargoyles which once defended it. If we journey once more into Godwyn's burial site, we also see a large number of deathroot stalks sticking out of the flooded ground. But these stalks are brittle. When struck, they shatter into tiny little brittle pieces. When we look closer at these roots using our telescope, we can see that they are darker than the deathroot growths that we find above ground. These stalks appear to have been burned into charcoal. It would seem that someone employed the use of the flame of ruin to burn Godwyn's deathroot tree. And in our current time, we know that Malenia appears to us, burned and bodiless, confused as to why she's still alive. Taking all this into consideration, we can begin to see a bigger picture. The fallen sector of the city of Leyndell is most likely where Godwyn's tree erupted from the ground. Someone had the tree burned, and the people of Leyndell flooded the city in order to stop the fires before they spread to the Erdtree. Unfortunately, their efforts to stop the Erdtree from burning were in vain. The Erdtree that currently stands in Leyndell is not a complete one, as we can see clearly looking at the doorway behind the Elden throne. Some might argue that this doorway is the remains of the Great Tree, which was chopped down in order for new sprouts to form back during the Age of the Crucible, and one of these shoots eventually grew into the Erdtree, taking up the space on the trunk. Now, I'm no lumberjack, but I can imagine that when a tree is chopped down, a large, intact, ornate doorway is normally not something left behind. We also seem to have spell descriptions which describe the Erdtree's age of abundance coming to an abrupt end. The Lord's Divine Fortification incantation tells us that the Erdtree itself was broken long ago. There is also a finger reader crone outside of Leyndell's main gate, who asks us if we can see the Erdtree glowing above. The Erdtree, as we see it now, is not completely whole, and we can base these assertions on the Erdtree saplings. Erdtree saplings grow with a glowing golden bark. The smaller, maturing minor Erdtrees can be found in a church just west of Leyndell, where we see that as these trees grow larger, they begin to lose their golden luster. Finally, when we look at a more fully grown minor Erdtree, we see that the bark has darkened like that of a normal tree, the only difference between normal trees and it being the glowing golden leaves that shed light. What's more interesting is that the minor Erdtrees actually are producing crystal tears. Not just sacred tears like the Erdtree, but because they are all genetic offspring of the Erdtree, each one is producing something slightly different than the sacred tears that we find in the churches of America. They are producing sap. The saplings are producing seeds, but the Erdtree is producing nothing. We look again at the concept art for the shadow of the Erdtree. We can see that the Erdtree has dark, physical bark. We can see this same dark bark growing along the tree guardians, who march around Leyndell and a few of the minor Erdtrees. The Erdtree avatars also manifest a dark, physical bark. What's more is that we actually can find some branches of the Erdtree which share in this same normal, brown, physical bark. We find the Erdtree depicted in art on the icon shield. The scene displayed on the shield is from America's Golden Age, and we see the tree is rendered with having its golden leaves and its normal brown bark. It's not to say that the glowing Erdtree is merely an illusion. because it almost certainly is not. It is still very much the same Erdtree as it was in the past, only it's not entirely there. Godwyn's tree appears to have damaged the Erdtree so greatly that large cracks can be seen erupting throughout the main body of the Erdtree, and it has appeared to have been broken off at its base, similar to the place where we currently see the doorway into Marika's prison chamber. With the Deathroot tree coiled around the Erdtree, if someone attempted to burn it, the fires would certainly spread from one tree to the other. When Godwyn's tree is destroyed, its ash would cover the city of Lanedell. The lower city, which stood over Godwyn's burial site, would have been weak, having that tree erupt out of the earth underneath it, shaking its foundations. As the rest of the citizens flooded that sector of the city, the added weight from the water and the collapsing, dying, dead tree would have caused that city to collapse. Those dead and broken pieces of the Erdtree's body would burn as well, leaving behind a stump from which they were severed. Those caught in the midst of the Erdtree burial cycle are now trapped inside the roots, with no branches left above to bear them into new life. Melena's intent would have been to burn the tree of Deathroot, not the Erdtree itself. However, the fire would spread between the two trees. Godwyn, however, is not a full being. He only exists now in body. Therefore, if his Deathroot tree is sprouting from his body and has no attachment to any sort of soul, Melena's fire would only burn and destroy the body of Godwyn's Deathroot tree. That is why Malenia appears to us the way she is, burned and bodiless. Only her body was necessary to burn away Godwyn's tree, because it was only a product of his body, and not a body and soul. And that explains our conundrum in Lanedell. The Erdtree still stands, it still shines, but the light that it gives off no longer heals. The roots no longer communicate with any branches above. There are no more rebirths, and those trapped in the catacombs are trapped in the roots of the Erdtree for an eternity. Because the body of the Erdtree above the trunk has been burned away. And so we see that Miquella's Haligtree is not simply a usurper to the Erdtree. It's the Land Between's only hope for those trapped in rebirth. Before the Shattering War began, Miquella had already been experimenting with his own blood to begin growing his Haligtree into an Erdtree. But with the scale of the war's devastation across the Lands Between, he would have had to begin accelerating his plans. He would call Latenna to guide the Albinaurics to the consecrated snowfield and lead them to the Haligtree. He and Malenia would have led the Misbegotten to the Haligtree themselves. Once there, Miquella would set up seals that he had copied from Celia in Ordina, the liturgical town. Once the construction of Elphael was complete, Miquella would give instructions to Malenia and the commanders Niall and O'Neill regarding the eclipse ritual, in a final attempt to grant Godwyn back his soul or provide him, at least, with the true death. Miquella would then embed himself inside the Haligtree to begin his ascension to full godhood. Commander Niall would take his army to Castle Sol to prepare for the eclipse ritual. We can still find a small detachment of soldiers loyal to Miquella standing guard within the castle, though all of them except Commander Nile are now spirits. These soldiers were tasked with performing a ritual which would capture the sun within an eclipse. It was this eclipse that Miquella hoped would grant Godwyn's soul a chance to escape the clutches of death and return to his body. We can also see that this eclipse seemed to have had an effect, at least in part, as the eclipse Chotel bears the power of Godwyn's death blight. Inside the castle, along the ridge, we find a large number of deathroot growths, and a small force of those who live in death, commanded by a tibia mariner. The true horror of this undead host, however, is a death bird, which appears on the ridge near the path closest to Castle Sol. Whatever took place during this ritual, it would seem that the armies of the dead were made aware. The valley in which Castle Sol sits bears both deathroot growths and golden lightning strikes. It is peculiar that it is not the deathblight lightning of Godwyn and Fortisax down in the deeper depths. It may be that Godwyn was fighting his own corruption in an effort to return to his siblings, striking deathblight with pure golden lightning. Commander Nile and his men would attempt to hold fast against this siege, waiting for the right moment to perform the ritual. All they needed now was a sure victory from Malenia in Caelid. Malenia marched south in hopes of challenging Radahn to release the stars from their prison. However, her victory proved unattainable. She was forced to resort to unleashing the Scarlet Aeonia to force Radahn to loosen his grip upon the stars above. But, even while Radahn is defeated, he is not killed, and though he is left maddened by the Scarlet Rot, he would continue to hold the sun and the stars in place, and so Miquella's ritual would again fail, and the twins would never again reunite with their brother. It would seem that none of Miquella's plans had succeeded, least of all his ascension within the Erdtree. His shedding of divine blood would catch the attention of another outer god known as the Formless Mother. She would send her omen servant, Moog, a creepy, blood-loving monster of a demon man, who would then cut Miquella from the heart of his Erdtree, stealing him away in hopes of birthing his own twisted dynasty of blood in the depths below the Lance Between. And so, Miquella's fate lies far beneath the earth, bound as a slave to a cruel and disturbing outer god, and forced to be a consort to a blood-crazed demon. Only, that might not be the end. This is Miquella we're talking about. Miquella the Unalloyed. He crafted unalloyed gold needles, tools which expel the influence of all other outer gods. And now would be a dang good time to bring up some of that strange glintstone that Miquella had been researching in Sellia. We found some in a hidden tower known as Mirage Rise in the west of Altus Plateau. In order to access this tower, we need to break 3 magical seals which hide the building in a small pocket dimension. The seals can be a bit tricky to find, but once we are given a map after interacting with the statue outside the entrance, we can find the seals easily enough. One of them is behind a rock. All of them are guarded by spirits of stone imps. Upon entering the tower, we find the ground is littered with that same golden glintstone from the Sellia mines. If we make our way up to the top of the tower, we'll find a dead scholar carrying a slumbering egg, which is an ingredient important in the Fever's cookbook items relating to sleep, dreams, and Saint Trina. Inside the chest, we find sorceries from the city of Sellia, which would turn the caster and their weapons invisible. This would have been quite handy for a young Miquella. And the most interesting part? There's a painting behind the scholar's desk which shows the Tower of Return back in its heyday. Miyazaki likes using paintings to pull us into a DLC, so maybe keep an eye on this one. So we found more of that strange glintstone. But what is it? It could be the ore from which unalloyed gold is made, but we also need to remember that glintstone comes from meteorites which struck the Earth long ago. Meteorites which came from the primeval current, from the stars. In the stars are the fates of both mortals and demigods. In a small hidden alcove just south of this tower, we can find a large number of sacred buds growing up around a hidden statue of Miquella hugging his sister Malenia. In front of the statue, we see a small gathering of octopus-like creatures. Remember how Godwyn turned into a creepy sea monster in the bottom of the Erdtree? When we fight certain sea-based enemies, we can see Godwyn's deathroot eyes along their bodies. It would seem that Godwyn has developed a sort of hive mind with creatures infected by his death blight. I believe these small octopi are subconsciously reacting to the will of Godwyn, trying to reach out to be with his siblings again. And the glowing, golden legendary item at the center of all of this, we find what it is that Miquella uncovered in the depths of the earth. This item is the Amber Starlight, said to be the fate of a demigod. Not just any demigod, but Miquella's fate. He searched for it, he found it, he ripped it from the earth and left it here in this hideaway as a promise to ascend to godhood, a promise to save the Albinaurics and Misbegotten, a promise to save his sister from scarlet rot, to maybe save Godwyn. So far, Miquella has not responded to any of Mohg's advances. It may be that his consciousness is left in the Halig tree somewhere, or he may have protected himself with some sort of incantation. We may want to take a closer look at that small golden ring he wears on his finger. If you've listened this far, I appreciate it very much. Let me know what you think down in the comments below. This is Void Tower, signing out.